Welcome to the Masuk Report. I'm Carl Bodner, and I'm pleased to be your host. The topic of our roundtable today is stem cell science. We have three of our frequent panelists to share their thoughts on this controversial topic, and they are Samantha Goldfarb, Bella Medeiros, and Sabrina Romansky. The science of stem cell research is, to say the least, most impressive. However, attached to it are serious ethical and moral questions and concerns. One fascinating achievement that opens some very special possibilities has been the development by neuroscientist Madeline Lancaster, who has generated living models of brains from a few stem cells. One cannot help but think what risks and hopeful possibilities this might inspire. So let's open by having our panelists each share their thoughts addressing several key questions. Would each of you please comment on stem cell science and, in particular, what benefits mini brain creation may provide? And I'd like to ask Sam to start that off.
Well, if you really, to start off, to create living brain tissue is incredible on its own. But then there's also the part, too, that the brain is such a sensitive organ. And it does so many things that we don't know a lot about, which is one of the reasons why neurology is so up and coming. By being able to test samples of brain tissue that aren't attached to someone living who's like actively needing it, there's a lot of good things that can come from that, because then we can see how it reacts. Although there are other bad things, like you can't tell necessarily how it's going to work inside a human, but we can start, and I think that's incredible.
What do you think, Bella?
And like you said, it's specifically in a human, so we can grow human brain cells, not just test on lab animals, which I think has both an ethical and a scientific benefit. So because the brains don't belong to anybody, like a living person, people who might argue that treatment of using brain cells from living people is ethically wrong, it provides another way of testing treatments and that kind of thing. And also, animals are not put in danger through these experiments, and thus lessening kind of that moral argument with psychology and science in general with animal testing and that kind of thing. So.
Sabrina, have you any thoughts?
I'm not coming at it from like a bio standpoint, but I think it's got to be a lot easier just to do your work on the specific organ that you're trying to test, instead of like trying to maneuver around a rat head or something. It's got to be a lot easier just to like look and say like, okay, this part of the brain reacted, and like just I'm testing this part, but just looking at a singular brain. I think it's got a lot of benefits just from the fact that it's isolated, and you can test what you want to test.
Well, I think all of us can agree that, that like any other new idea, new advancement in science, you're going to get positive and agreeable responses, but also negative and disagreeable responses. Being as old as I am as a senior citizen, I find the hopeful part outweighs what might be conceived as the negative side when you look at the tremendous influx of diseases like Parkinson's or diseases like Alzheimer's, which I think scares any of us as we get older in life. But again, it's controversial. But what invention, innovation, discovery hasn't been controversial? So we have to deal with it. And the one thing here I think we could say is that, we might think it's theologically incorrect for this to be done. But you have to look at the long run as to, will humankind be rescued, in a sense, from some illnesses or disabilities even? Being a person that's got a 22-year-old multiple needs grandson, and one of those needs is autism. They don't know exactly what happens with the neurons in certain parts of the brain. I don't want our audience to think they take a whole big chunk of brain. We're talking about a petri dish with 30, 40 little segments of what would represent different portions of the brain. And then just studying, like, if there's a injection, well, how does it respond? What do the neurons do? But again, it's definitely sensitive. I can't dismiss that fact. But let me ask, do you believe this science goes too far with respect to the moral, ethical questions? Are we pushing the line? Who would like to respond?
Okay. I don't think so. I think there's a lot of people that are interested in this sort of thing, and they look at science as like a sort of puzzle, or like they'll look at biology as like kind of figuring things out. And if someone's really passionate in that, and they also see like the benefit of, oh my gosh, my passion can help somebody, then go for it. And I do think that the health benefits to people outweigh anything that you might say about, oh my gosh, you're creating life and you're doing the same, like, because either way you're still doing testing on something that has to be in some way living. So I
So
don't
Samantha?
I think, like you were saying, and like you were saying as well, the potential, at least in my opinion, outweighs. But I have to acknowledge, too, that idea of, does it, I mean, we don't know, for example, what consciousness really is yet. We have some ideas, but we're not sure necessarily if this tissue is alive or what life really is in that respect. But I think if we look at it from a more scientific perspective, for example, they don't have pain neurons, as far as I know, the little petri dishes of things, and hurting them seems to be the best way to go about helping other people. And I think personally that's one of our goals in science, is to go and help as many people as we can with our discoveries. We do it for the world. And I think if you get caught up in the feelings of like that arise from a small bit of like inorganic tissue, I think you might get bogged down and not realize what's so important about what the science is supposed to do.
Bella, any comments?
Right, I completely agree with all three of you. I think that ultimately it's the benefits outweigh the risks, but I know Sam and I both are in UConn biology, and we discussed the ethics of stem cell research, specifically embryonic stem cell research, and the main controversy with that was whether the embryos could feel pain and that kind of thing. So I think that kind of conversation carries over to here, where we're really concerned with whether or not the cells feel pain. We're not actually taking into consideration that oftentimes the cells aren't specialized, and even if they are, like Sam said, they don't have pain receptors. They don't, they can't feel pain. They don't know who they are. They don't have a consciousness, at least as far as we know. As we continue to research, that might change, and that therefore the discussion might change a lot, and kind of the arguments might change. But for right now, I feel like it's morally correct.
May I add to some of that?
Sure.
I really like that point you brought up, and one of the things I wanted to say too is the idea, I think one of the things, the main topics we're dancing around too, is the fate of the cells that are alive, but also like not only just life, but also like, is pain worse than death, or is death worse than pain? Because if we were hurting these stem cells, is it worse than if they were just to go out of existence? Like what, like, because I mean, we're also looking at the difference between the death of these small cells in research, especially like embryonic, like you were talking about, and they have the potential for life, and also these brain the petri dish cells, and talking about whether their lives should be considered the way human life should be, in that we can use them to alter human life and lengthen it and stuff like that. So I think that even if we don't discuss it any further, I think that might be something we want to keep in our minds too, that of the broader moral and ethical concerns, I think that's one of them.
And I think, again, I'll make a second reference to it, that you have to look at the theological prospect here. For some people, this could be very frightening. They may think that it's contrary to the beliefs of Judeo-Christian ideas about what constitutes a person, what makes us have our personhood, but any discovery that very often now, even children in school learn about scientists of the 17th century and, learning how the blood flows inside the body. And they were certainly doing it in a very crude manner then. That we're always going to have that issue. Now, we honor those scientists who made those discoveries. So there's kind of a twisted irony to these things. And there's going to be a lot to yet be said and seen over this, I have to say. If we assume this research is here to stay, are your thoughts about the economic cost and benefits of stem cell science? What are your thoughts?
I'll go ahead and answer this first, if you don't mind. I think that a lot of, as human beings, we're really nearsighted in what we in our future. We don't see very far past our own futures and the future of humanity as a whole. So I feel that even though it might be ethically correct to fund this, and even if we do start the process of funding this, a lot of people, especially here in the United States, might feel like they are against it because they don't see it benefiting themselves and seeing it as a waste of money rather than to benefit the future of humanity.
Well, those are tough choices when you talk about benefiting humanity. I mean, should we spend more money on our prisons, or should we put money into stem cell research? It's an interesting thing. You have to make choices. Right. And of course, some people aren't going to like the fact that public money gets into this, not just corporate money. I would have to guess, though, that pharmaceutical firms are just sitting with excitement about this kind of research and what the future prospects could mean. And that's where some big money comes. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that, it does become a very different question when it's one thing to argue about the ethics of it, but it's a completely separate thing to think about, okay, wow, who's paying for this? And I don't really think that it's our job to determine how effective it is for every person. I don't know that it's fair to say, okay, this will eventually benefit everybody and everyone has to pay for it, because I think if there's enough if there's enough hope in the idea, then it shouldn't be too hard to come up with private funding for it. I'm not sure that it's fair necessarily to cast a blanket tax on everybody because someone decided, okay, this will help everyone eventually. So I think if there's enough respect for the idea and enough excitement, enough hope that the thing will work, I think it shouldn't be a problem to fund it without cutting into taxes.
What are you thinking, Sam?
I'm listening to both your points of view. I like your idea of the fact that, we have, I think the stance you're taking economically is that, what we have is what we earned. And that's something because the personal things that we do in our lives too, that does matter, and that in a lot of ways contributes to a sense of self and a sense of providing for your family and autonomy and things like that. And I think we should definitely preserve that. And I also agree with you that the science of it is going to be beneficial, probably for most people, but the fact that it would better humanity. And I think if there was a negotiated way between the people behind both of your points of view to go and say, how can we generate private funding so that we can benefit everybody and still give some people their autonomy? I think because money isn't a hard and fast thing necessarily, it's static and it flows, I think there'd be a way to negotiate through both of your points of view so the best option can be reached.
Well, and when you're trying to get some of the best research universities and minds working on this, you're going to see in many cases that public dollars through the federal government, through the Health Institute, through the Center for Disease Studies, is going to go into some of these high-level research universities. And but the private sector will probably still contribute more. I don't know if you'll see the connection here, but, we have public schools. Everybody pays whether they have kids in or not, on the promise that the future will be better from it. And so that becomes an interesting parallel. But sooner or later, and I will argue this brazenly, everything in our culture comes down to dollars. Where's the money going to come from? And if you don't have all the money for all you need, and you can't make the pie bigger, which slices of the pie do you make smaller? And those are going to be rigid political and economic questions that will combat with the questions and motivations of science.
Right. Can I add?
Yes.
I think that it, like Sabrina said, like if there's enough interest in the prospect of the creation of the mini brains and the research that'll go into it, I think that a lot of funding will come from private sectors, but I also think it's necessary for the public to itself to fund the research, because there's not enough money in either of those sectors for the funding to, or for the experiments to happen. I think that you need to combine both of them in order to come up with enough funding so that you can maintain that balance that Sam was talking about. And I think, like you said about public schools, it's not easy for a lot of people to give up the hard-earned money that they have made, and ultimately it does come down to dollars, but I feel like if there is enough public interest, and if we can show the public that it does make a difference, then it'll ultimately be beneficial.
Well, I'll add one more thing. If governments have vested interest, they're also going to bring to the table some regulatory powers so that corporations can't dictate who will do the research, how it will be done, when does it reach its line of not being safe or ethical anymore. And that we have to count on for the political sector to provide us, would be my thought.
Well, I don't think it's fair to make the government the dictator either. So I'm not sure that it makes sense in the long run politically to have the government decide that, okay, I want to take from the tax pool a certain amount of money to go to this. I think it'll, or some politician might think that, okay, this will help everybody. I don't know that it's the politician's job to say. I'm not sure that it's really right, and that's why I'm going to stick to my belief that if there's enough interest, if the scientists here can prove that what they've got makes sense or can be helpful, I think they should have an easy enough time to collect money without taking away the public's will and what the public wants to do and what the public's money goes to.
Well, on that, we're going to have to close our discussion, but what I want to say is I think what we've done here is laid out on the table, a broad spectrum or imagery of what's all involved here, and that it's so complex, okay?
Absolutely.
Depending on how you want to view it. But unless it's brought to the table, as you're suggesting, and there's dialogue, we won't make that progress. And the key thing, I think, is can knowledge, this kind of knowledge, offer more hope? And I think that becomes an important thing, because life and living in the absence of hope is very empty. Is there any closing comment any one of you would like to share? How you feel about all this?
I'd like to share one. If possible, I'd like to do my best to reconcile. I'm sensing a little bit I don't want anybody to leave this and think that their opinions aren't being heard, validated, or not
You're
being
all
taken
valid.
care of. No, but yes, but I think I just wanted to say too that I think with more of this discussion that's going on, I think there will be ways that the both of you can get the opinions that you guys have put forth today in the discussion. I think that's possible to reconcile if we have more of this communication, so that we don't have to lose our autonomy like you were worried about, and we don't have to worry about the future not being represented. So I think with more discussions like these, which need to happen more among the adults of this nation, with the politicians and the scientists coming together, I think that's something we really need to focus on in order to make this thing happen and effective.
And I think these discussions have to occur even amongst students like yourself, students in college. We have an English teacher here who has a course on ethical arguments. This is the kind of thing that is needed to help young people become intellectually stimulated. And once you get that discussion going, minds begin to open up, and who knows, the resolution may not be as terrible or difficult or challenging or discriminating as we might fear or hope for. So, my thanks to our guests, Samantha, Bella, Sabrina, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of the Masuk Report, I wish you well.